You've been taught that painting is about capturing reality, light, atmosphere, accuracy. But what if one artist looked at a city like London and decided that accuracy itself was the problem? Not because he couldn't paint reality, but because reality no longer felt enough. This is the moment color stopped describing the world and quietly began rewriting it. In the early 20th century, Europe was changing too fast to keep up with. Cities expanded, industry accelerated, and artists began searching for new ways to respond. Most were still trying to observe the world more carefully, but André Derain chose a different path. He didn't simply observe what he saw, he transformed it into something more immediate, more emotional. When Derain arrived in London in 1906, he wasn't interested in painting the city as it appeared. He was interested in how it felt. The Thames did not remain gray, and the sky did not stay pale. Instead, they shifted into intense oranges, greens, and blues, breaking away from realism entirely. What mattered was no longer accuracy, but sensation. If this shift already feels unfamiliar, subscribe, because this is where modern art begins to change. In works like Charing Cross Bridge, London, the city is no longer a stable place. Color stops following logic and begins following intensity. The result is something strangely alive, slightly unstable, almost like a memory rather than a direct observation. The painting doesn't show London as it is, it shows how it feels to experience it. This was the central idea of Fauvism. Not beauty, not precision, but emotional force. Critics at the time didn't understand it. They called these artists wild beasts, shocked by the raw, unnatural colors. To them, the paintings looked unfinished, even careless. But what they were actually seeing was a complete shift in how art could function. If this is changing how you see art, subscribe now, because it only gets more radical from here. Derain's real breakthrough was not just in using bold color, but in freeing it from responsibility. A tree no longer needed to be green, and a river no longer needed to be blue. Color became independent, no longer tied to the visible world. And once that separation happened, painting itself was no longer about representation. It became about construction. In the turning road, space flattens and forms simplify into something almost rhythmic. The landscape feels built rather than observed, like a composition of sensations instead of a place you could physically enter. Subscribe if you want to understand why modern art stopped making sense, and why that was necessary. At the time, this shift was more than stylistic, it was unsettling. Because if color no longer describes reality, then what is painting actually doing? That question reaches beyond art. It begins to challenge how we trust what we see, and whether perception itself can still be relied upon. Fauvism didn't last long. By around 1910, the movement had already begun to dissolve as artists moved toward new experiments. But its impact remained. It proved that art no longer needed to imitate the world. It could construct its own reality, guided by emotion rather than observation. If you want more videos like this, slow, visual, and thought-provoking, subscribe. And once color was freed from reality, everything else began to follow. Form loosened, space collapsed, and meaning itself became unstable. What began as wild, uncontrolled color slowly became the foundation of modern art. And from this point forward, art would no longer ask what the world looks like, but how it can be reimagined.